Hello, everyone. I'm Pamela Brewer, welcoming you to this edition of M.E.S.H. M.E.S.H is the place where every week we are talking about your mental, emotional, and social health. And today is no different. I'm really pleased to introduce you to today's guest. Her name is Tracy Doyle, and Tracy has written a book entitled Life Storms Finding Your Clear Sky. And Tracy, I gotta say, we have life storms all the time, but I'm going to say that in today's world, finding your clear sky is so very much needed. Tracy Doyle, welcome to M.E.S.H.
Thank you, Dr. Brewer. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, let's start a little bit from the beginning, and I'd like to ask you a little bit about your story because you talk in the book about how you got to the place where you wanted to create and write this book and create the Aurora method. You talk about as a child feeling unworthy, which
Mm-hmm.
is so many children feel that way. So many adults don't get it, don't know it. Can you say a little bit about what that was like for you?
Yeah, I was born to a teen mom, and she was mentally ill. But back then, they didn't know what bipolar disorder was.
Okay.
And so, my mom had made some choices, and that were, for me, profoundly. They profoundly affected me on many levels. And sadly, sometimes with mental illness, if the person is going through their own thing, there's that sense where they're not able to sort of nurture, right? And so it wasn't that my mom was a bad mom. It was that she sometimes, when she would be in her own thing, she wasn't able to nurture. So imagine being a child and you come home and you're all excited, right, about school, and you feel like no one cares because you're not acknowledged and you're not validated. But some of the other things that happened was the man that she ultimately married when I was 7 years old, he was an addict and an alcoholic. And
Mhm.
his mom, she had, I don't really understand her, but she was very mean spirited.
Okay.
And because I wasn't my stepdad's daughter, she would name call me, and
Oh,
and she would call me names that just were cruel, and I just felt like I didn't belong. She was the one who really sort of, how do I want to say it? Where I felt like I didn't belong because I didn't have a family.
ah,
Because I didn't know my dad, and I realized that my siblings were my half siblings, and that my mom's siblings, who I grew up with, were really my mom's family and not my family.
ah.
So there were experiences like that, and then of course, um, having grown up in this whole world of addiction, when my stepdad finally hit his bottom, sadly, it led to his death. And
Mm.
and all the lead up to that led, like created a lot of scarcity and survival techniques for me, because not survival techniques, survival skills, where I had to really step up because my mom couldn't handle it, and I became sort of the caregiver of my mom and my siblings at the age of 10.
That happens so often and certainly too often. And if I recall correctly, you talked about having experienced what I would describe as some extremely negative religiosity in the house. Is that a fair reflection?
Yeah, I mean, it was more, there wasn't really much spirituality because it was, my mom was struggling. She had this husband, she didn't know how to handle it. And it was just very, very negative. And then, my mom's family, who I love deeply, my grandfather, he actually studied to be a priest, but he was rejected because he stuttered. So he practiced as an alcoholic. We practiced Catholic traditions in his model of the world, right? So, but he
Got
did teach us good things. He taught us about, the value of goodness and kindness and tolerance and acceptance. But
okay.
yet there was a disconnect with that, because sadly, when he would be drunk, he was anything but. So, I think so when you say the negativity, and when
Right.
I speak to that, there's just a lot of sort of confusion around what these things mean. But I hold everything he teaches me, well, he taught me today, because when I really got through a lot of these things, I honestly went back to his words.
One of the things that you've just said that I think is so important that we often lose sight of is that in the face of trauma, which is never a good thing, but there's sometimes a tendency to think that trauma ruins you, that
Hmm.
will never be the same, that you will never recover. and that all the things that you learned during those traumatic times are that you don't have choices, that you don't have options. And I would say that your book, Life Storms, Finding Your Clear Sky, Practices to Overcome Negative Thinking, Build Connection, and Find Fulfillment, says that none of that is really true, that you can
Absolutely.
have trauma and you can still be who and wish you want to be and who you want to be in your life today. So tell us a little bit about the Aurora method. How did that come to be? What is that?
Yeah, so I want to say that I am an example because when you read my story, it's pretty intense, and not all of it is in there either, in terms of the type of trauma that I experienced. And so, what I want to say is that what I've learned, and this is all through lived experience, is that our life experiences shape our thinking. And what I really want to emphasize, it's not just trauma, because what I've come to learn over the years, as I've helped other women struggle with emotional burnout, is that we're all wounded, right? We all have experiences in our lives. And for some of us, it is extreme trauma, like in my case. And other folks, it's critical parents that wound us. It's being made fun of at school and carrying with you, I'm not good enough because kids are making fun of you on the schoolyard. So, irrespective, my belief is we're all wounded. And what I've learned is that we internalize these beliefs. And what tends to happen is when we refeel that wound, we go back to the initial belief that was created. So I'll give an example. That wound for me, when I would feel like my mom didn't care, it was, I'd come home from school and I would feel rejected, right? My belief was nobody cares. And then where would I go from there? So over time, when I would refeel that, where would I go then? Well, I would just disengage and I would avoid her. Now, how did that affect me in adulthood? If I felt that way, I would disengage and I would avoid people, which led to conflict, which led to me isolating myself, and led to me feeling alone when in fact I wasn't, because I'm the one who pulled away. So the Aurora method is all about helping us recognize how our life experiences shaped our thinking. And for me, what I've learned is when we can recognize like what it's done, right? So what do I mean by that? So let me go through. I call it the reaction cascade. So I use my body to explain it. So when we refeel something, someone looks at us a certain way, someone questions us, right? All of a sudden, it triggers that initial belief, which then goes to, I always point to the middle of my mind, that foundational limiting belief of either I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy, which then shoots to our toes and triggers a fear. Either we're going to lose something, we're never going to get something, or that we're less than, right? And when that fear is triggered, where does it go? And I always point in between my two ears back to the center of our mind. And it
Uh,
takes us to self centered traits, thoughts, feelings, or behaviors. So let me unpack that for a minute.
Sounds good.
In my case, self reliance. I have to do it all myself, right? Or self pity when I feel rejected. Nobody cares about me, poor me. In other cases, it could go to self effacing. Having been a trauma victim, self effacing means being invisible and voiceless. So I was sexually abused. So what did I do in response to that? I said nothing. I was voiceless, and I just wanted to be invisible because I felt shame. So what does that do in adult life? So all those things may have worked for me getting through all that time in my earlier life. But as I grew, and what I saw was what I was projecting to the outside world from a self-reliance perspective, it told people I didn't trust them, right?
Right.
That's what that behavior did. If I thought I have to do it all myself, and I did it all myself, everyone around me thought they weren't good enough, right? So what I
Interesting.
realized was how the impact of my life experiences on myself, but more importantly on others, kept me apart, isolated, and alone. And when I learned how to see them, name them, I could change them through various mindfulness techniques. And that's what the Aurora method does. It shows you how to create your own personalized mindfulness program, right? Because for me, that, what I found was that, I would take other people's affirmations or mindfulness approaches, but they didn't work for me. So once I could see them, name them, I could change them, and I could build bridges back to others.
One of the things that you've just said, which I think is really interesting, is you were teaching other people to treat you the way you had been treated. You
Hmm.
were teaching other people to experience you the way you had experienced yourself.
Yep.
What a powerful observation.
Hmm. It's so powerful. And when we recognize that we can reshape what shaped us, and I always get chills when I say this because what we get back is that inner fulfillment and joy that we once experienced, right? And for me, that level of abundance, and I mean emotional fulfillment and emotional abundance, is just it's so hard to put words to it because when you bridge back to the people that maybe you were estranged from, it could be parents, it could be siblings, it could be friends, and when you get that back, that sense of inner joy is just so wonderful. And that doesn't mean it doesn't work. It doesn't work, but it doesn't provide results at work. For me, I struggled at work because I was a CEO, right? And I would, essentially like go into my own stuff and I would push people away. And yet my self-reliance said to them I didn't trust them and they felt inadequate as workers. Once I recognized how I affected that, I could even shift the dynamic of our culture.
And it sounds like you might have gotten a lot better productivity out of your staff when they realized that you believed in them, that you believed that they could do what they had been asked to do.
Exactly, exactly. And that's not to say that when you do this work that you're perfect, right? Because these
Exactly.
are deep, 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 deep. What the Aurora method does is when you start learning the practices, when you recognize the reaction cascade, yeah, I still reacted, right? But when I
Okay.
reacted, I knew what to do quickly and I could quickly address it rather than in my old way would be, oh, I reacted. I better just go invisible and I just better avoid people, which self avoidance is a trait, right? So I would do things like that. But when I was able to change that and say, no, I'm going to be present, I'm going to address this, I was able to shift the dynamic. And so for me, the Aurora method helps us shift every dynamic. When we learn how to connect with ourselves, then we can shift the dynamic of every relationship that we touch outside of us. And that is the gift of the Aurora method.
Let me ask you this. I mean, clearly there are more steps to the Aurora method than we can go into any significant amount of detail today. But take me to perhaps the first step of the Aurora method. Where does one begin? I mean, you talk about, mindfulness, you're talking about looking within. For a lot of people, like, what is she talking about?
Well, thank you for that. I tend to jump all over the place sometimes. So the Aurora method really starts with a kind look back. It's a self-assessment. And what it does is it asks you the questions, who are you angry with and who hurt you and what bubbles up immediately? And what you do is you write it down. It's a step-by-step guided process. But the beauty is the second phase of the Aurora method, which is the breakthrough phase, where there's a tool called the turnaround. And you
Ah,
get to really learn how to look at things with emotional clarity, not shame, not regret, and you're able to look at it and go, wow, these are my patterns. So that's what I mean. When you see them, you can name them. Then it goes through the breakthrough is there. Then you can change them, which then brings us to I call it the life storm navigator, because now you can start developing your own practices, but it brings us to the third phase where we can actually restore connection, not only with ourselves, but with other people. I call it acknowledgement conversations because we can acknowledge some of the things. And it shows you that. And lastly, there's daily practices to keep it.
you know, eh, what's interesting is as you describe the process, the foundation of everything you're saying is that you can make a difference in your own life. If something has hurt me years ago, it's been hanging around for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
but as soon as I'm able to identify it, and that's a process, right? Because you may not know, right? But
Mm-hmm.
as I am able to identify that thing or those things or those experiences or those people or you name it that have felt hurtful to me, that's the first step in me being able to say and do and think and feel different things. That's an extraordinary gift that I can give myself. Isn't
Mm-hmm.
that amazing?
It is, because the self-assessment really just helps you see like how your life experiences shaped you. It has one part of it where you're really looking at what needs were stunted. And then they're not questions, they're just check boxes, right? Because I love Maslow's work. I believe that, Abraham, I studied psychology and counseling, and I loved how Maslow, and back then I didn't get it, but what he talked about was anytime we have an emotional wound that affects our needs, we're stunted and it halts us in growing. And so that stunt is usually living in a place of lack, meaning, I'm focusing on what I don't have. That's right, rather than what I do. And it also, perpetuates discontentment. I'm so unhappy. I'm so unhappy. And I live like that for so long.
Yeah.
I call it looking at life through a straw. But when we recognize how our life
Right.
experience
Right.
shapes us from the needs, then we move over to say, how did I respond to that? And I don't mean respond in a negative way. Like I said, I was sexually abused. I responded by being voiceless and invisible. But then I can see the pattern of how that played out in my life in relationships that actually mattered, right? So that's what the self assessment gives us. And it gives us the ability to name it. And when we see the traits that we develop as a result of it, I'm book smart. So when I saw, a friend of mine shared this tool with me. And when I saw like the word selfish, I was like, oh, come on, right? But then I was like, let me start looking up self-centered behaviors, feelings, and traits. And as I did and I defined them, and I look at it as a roadmap today, I know what's happening. And now that means I know what I can change. So,
You're characterizing this sense that many of us have, that we tend to look at life through a straw, and what a narrow view is that. And
mhm,
yet that is what we do. But even the visual of that, wait a minute, I'm looking at life through, I I'm shrinking my own life.
that's right.
So the good news is I don't have to. The good news is that I can put that straw down, and it may be kind of scary, but I can really do something different and just broaden my sense of myself. What you're talking about is really so exciting for so many people. Let me ask you this. We do have just a few moments left, and I do want to get an opportunity to get a sense of where people can get more information about your work. But as you start to broaden your life, you're kind of talking to yourself, you're listening to yourself. Lots of people are saying, well, what is the point of that?
Mhm.
What do you say to that? Why pay attention to myself? Why listen to me?
You know, I think a lot of us live, and I share this with anyone I work with, which is here we are in the center, right? But our left hand will point out it's them that are causing this, or it's us, it's my husband or my wife that isn't, that they're the problem, right? So it's always outside. When we have the ability to come in and say, wait, what about me? And we have the ability to see what's happening within me, and we can take that 5 minutes of quiet to recognize it. And I keep saying this, everyone I work with, when we shift, everyone around us shift. It's not that they're changing. Our perspective is changing, but we also create an environment of safety, trust, because they see what how we have changed and shifted. So that's why it's so important to go within to oneself and to work this. And I always want to say this work isn't about fixing yourself. I mean, I think so many of us, it's fix, right?
Right.
Or put me in a microwave and like I want to be better in a minute. But it's really about when we can understand our patterns that quietly shape everything, how we think, how we feel, how we act, how we show up. Then when we understand that, then we actually can change things. And we don't think we can, but trust me, you can. I'm living proof of it. I would love to share my story if anyone wants to meet me. But the book, and the Aurora method are just really about people who are tired of the thing that keeps happening over and over again. And so if you're asking yourself, why does this keep happening to me?
Right.
Why am I like this? When will it ever get better? Then if you're ready to change the story, right? Because it's really the stories that we tell ourselves in our minds, then you have a solution. So that's why it's so important.
Tracy, we're going to have to run in half a second. Tell us how we can get more information about you and about your book.
Sure. The book is available on Amazon, and I'm available at tracydoyle.life. And if anyone's interested in learning more, schedule a one-on-one with me. I'm happy to meet.
Terrific. Again, thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing your vision, and for the work that you do. Thank you. Tracy Doyle, creator of the Aurora Method Coaching and author of, Tracy, what's the name of your book?
The book is called Life Storms: Finding Your Clear Sky.
Terrific. Folks, thank you again for joining us on this edition of M.E.S.H. We are here. I am here every week, and I hope that you are here every week as well. I encourage you to share today's conversation with anyone that you care about, to subscribe to our program, and I will see you next Wednesday. You take care.